The clip I'm about to show you is from Joshua Haymes. You might know him from his connection to Doug Wilson, or remember him from this clip here, where he is essentially arguing that slavery is not evil. And the video you're about to see shouldn't surprise you from this kind of individual, and yet it still stings because I know how impressionable young men are and how many young men are watching men like this who are making these disgusting claims about what it is to be a real man. So watch this clip and then we're going to get into it.
Every evangelical says the Bible has to be literal. It's literal. It's literal until we get to the verse about David killing 400 men and collecting their foreskins in order to marry his crush. Then we're not so into biblical literalism, are we?
Yeah. That verse just makes me want to take the Bible literally even harder, okay? I don't know about you. That is one of the most hardcore passages in Scripture. Any real man loves that verse. You've got King Saul demanding that if David even wants a chance at marrying his daughter, he has to infiltrate the enemy ranks, slaughter 100 of them, and bring back their foreskins as trophies for proof.
There are so many different ways that I thought about dissecting this video, but I think the main framing that I want for this is to help distinguish the difference between this faux strength that is clearly wrapped up in insecurity from Joshua against real strength. And I get it. I am not knocking the fact that there are so many young men in every generation, this has always been the case, that are trying to figure out what it means to be a man, what it is to get their masculine identity. I'm not against that. I don't think that we should be speaking negatively to those points. But again, it terrifies me that the main sources feeding this true hunger for what it is to be masculine come so often not only from the church, but from the more toxic side of the church, like we see here. They're everywhere, these insecure religious influencers that prey on the attention they get from these young men, rooting them on, and who take advantage of that legitimate hunger for masculine male role models and attach it to biblical violence, and then call the result real masculinity. Joshua would have called Jesus a cuck. I can almost guarantee it. This isn't someone who understands love or grace or forgiveness. This is ego and defensiveness. And again, above everything else, insecurity. And young men deserve better. I'm not saying I'm perfect or that I'm going to lead the next great generation of men. I just want to offer a counter here. Even if you are a religious young man, you don't have to be this. And so I want to talk about this video and I want to talk about that story just a little bit today. And yes, we're also going to cover a few of the excuses that are typically tied to these kinds of biblical passages here at the end, because these kind of excuses are what allow people like Joshua to jump in front and say, this is awesome, this is so hardcore, every real man loves this. But then if they get pushback, they can say, well, you don't understand. You're just soft. This is what it was to be a man. This is how you survived back then. The ancient world was different. Yeah, but was it more moral? Was it still correct? Is this the kind of God who does these things, orders these things, condones these things, allows these things, etc., that we want to follow? I can't stand that whole argument of it was different back then. Agreed. But you have an immutable God, a God who says that this man who does these things, David I'm speaking about, is a man after his own heart, a God who in the Bible says there was only one sin that David committed, and it had nothing to do with this verse or any of the other horrific things that David did. See this video for that. I've spoken a lot about David, so I'm going to try not to have that be the point of this video. But yes, you can read about the biblical story here in 1 Samuel 18. Saul tells David he can marry his daughter if he brings back 100 Philistine foreskins. We know in context that Saul is doing this to actually have David killed. He doesn't think he's going to be able to do it, which again just makes it look all the more heroic to people like Joshua. David does more than what is expected. He doubles it. So this is a story about political manipulation, using a woman as property, as a prize, enemy combatants not just being killed or destroyed, but mutilated, as if there was no other way for David to show this to Saul, other than genital trophies, and simply violence as masculinity. One of the first books I kind of read around the idea of masculinity from a Christian perspective is one that many of you are probably familiar with, wild at heart. And it's really a book for fathers to teach to their sons. And David is held up as this beautiful example of what it is to be a man. So Joshua's not off base here. He's just leaning into the parts that Christians usually try to tone down a bit, which is part of his deal. It's the shock value is half of it. And of course, Joshua here wasn't really answering or even trying to answer the video he was reacting to. The critique was clearly about the selective nature of Christians as they highlight certain parts of the Bible and don't discuss or don't promote others. And she's right. Think about what every kid learns in Sunday school about David: a sweet young shepherd, a poet, a harp player, a man after God's own heart. We don't typically talk about the genital mutilation, the man who wins a woman through violence, who's just the first of his many wives. He's a liar, he's a cheater, he's a murderer. And even Christians, when they acknowledge these shortcomings, do it under this false pretense of, see, God uses the weakest, the worst, the broken. But that's not what God says. Again, God says David is wonderful. He just messed up that one time. And again, I really think we have to hone in on the man after God's own heart. The Bible also tells us that God searches the heart and knows man. And in all of the searching he has done, in all the hearts he has seen, it is David who gets this compliment from God. What should have been the ultimate compliment from God, but instead is actually a huge insult to God. So she's right. The public-facing Bible is absolutely sanitized, where the actual Bible is not, and that's an issue. But Joshua does the schoolyard trick of, nah, your critique doesn't matter because guess what? I like that. The barbarism sells it for me. It makes me want to take the Bible more literally. It's so hardcore. What is he, 9? I get it. I'm a guy too. I understand watching the war movies. I love an underdog. But is that all this is for him? A story? A twisted up story of heroism? There's 1,000 more that are more moral, more interesting, more clever, and also that aren't supposed to be representing the real God that he kneels before and worships. All I see is a confession here from Joshua that he is sick and twisted and enjoys sick and twisted things, especially when he can feel morally superior because of it. And what's a better cover for moral superiority than religion? Nothing. And good for him. He's taken it literally. At least he's not hiding behind it. Again, that was kind of the props I gave him in the video where he says slavery isn't evil. He's just being biblically consistent. And we see this. A lot of people are tired of having to hide behind the bad parts of religion, so they're embracing it, which is the danger, is the harm of progressive Christianity that I've been calling out for years. If you just pretend the bad parts aren't there, if you water it down yourself and then you say, well, why are you attacking Christianity? Look, the average Christian just loves God, they love their neighbor, they want to do good in their community, and, they pray because it brings them comfort. Yeah, maybe, but it doesn't take away from what the Bible says, and it doesn't take away from people when they defend the faith, and those things are used against them, eventually going to the only place you can go, which is to re-embrace it, to hold it as a flag, instead of being ashamed of it, like so many Christians who know there's some issues in the Old Testament, but come on, have you met Jesus? Do you know what he did for me personally? And so I believe we'll continue to see a rise in this kind of thing. But taking it literally, being consistent enough to do so, isn't the same as morally processing it. Do that. Saul used his daughter as bait. David killed men to obtain mutilated body parts and did so 2 times more than he needed to. Also, I know for a fact, you can see his most recent short, that Joshua is the kind of man who is so homophobic that he can't recognize gay marriage or only refers to homosexuals as sodomites, etc., and yet loves the story where his hero is personally handling hundreds of penises. Like, it's just insane where the lines are drawn for people like this. Foreskins are trophies, like a fucked up serial killer. And by the way, this in the story contextually is part of David's rise. His getting to a place where he can be chosen to replace Saul, who is no longer doing God's bidding because he wouldn't complete the genocide to the letter of the law. So yes, taking it literally, but that doesn't turn the horror of this into something holy. Reading your barbaric story doesn't all of a sudden make it moral. He's not answering for anything here. I don't care if the story happened or not. I don't care if we're supposed to take it literal or not. I know how we're supposed to take it contextually. It's absolutely something we're supposed to believe really happened, but Christians will argue about that because, again, a lot of Christians can't accept the awful parts of their Bible. But the real question is, what kind of person reads this story and has the moral takeaway that this is awesome, that this is so hardcore, any real man would love it? So let's talk about that hardcore as a moral position. Lots of things can seem intense and cinematic or masculine in that primitive way. And I understand the appeal. I really do. There's something about the concept of Vikings and conquest that is exciting. But I wouldn't try to get my morals off these people who are reported for their raping and pillaging. I get the appeal of watching Gladiator with Russell Crowe. Those scenes are exciting. But gladiators killing each other and animals, even when not forced to please the crowd, is something we should morally be aware of and not condone. All the movies where kings show the severed heads of their enemies, warriors taking trophies, all the cartel violence in the modern movies, ancient armies humiliating their combatant enemies. Like, I get it. Again, the appeal to some sense of adventure, overcoming, victory, war. Like, I really do get it. But again, to condone it or to see it as beautiful or awesome or so cool or the definition of real masculinity or holy is insane. This kind of intensity is not a virtue. And yet, young men are constantly being shown these images, these ideas, and being sold on the aesthetic of it instead of, being ethical. I made that video response to that channel calling them out. And now once I watch a bunch of videos from someone, they show up in my algorithm, and they actually had a pretty decent video on how the church is still talking about biblical masculinity the wrong way, and that they would never hold up someone like Mr. Rogers as a beacon of real masculinity. And it was a great point. She goes on to talk about how Mr. Rogers was essentially a badass when it came to actually protecting children. And I agree. But I just have no doubt that someone like Joshua would call Mr. Rogers a pussy. And I'm not even against the fact that sometimes men have to go to war and do horrible and hard things to protect their loved ones or their country or their freedom. Again, I'm not trying to come at this being soft, but there's a difference between dreadful duty and glorifying violence. And I think real masculine maturity is seeing the difference there, understanding what sometimes has to be done against rooting for it happening as much and as awful as possible. I'm very clear on which side Joshua is on and which side he is leading other young men down. That aesthetic masculinity is easy. It's cheap, just like his pipe trick. But moral masculinity is difficult. It requires maturity and introspection and empathy. But that's a sin to someone like Joshua. So to be clear, I don't hate masculinity. I don't think that men should be weak. I don't want everyone soft and passive and ashamed. I don't want all men to be neutered or all the other things that people who are so in one camp and hear any pushback say, oh, you're just too soft. Masculinity can be beautiful. Strength can be incredible. Courage is good. Discipline is good. But restraint can be good. Nuance can matter. Competence is good. And that's exactly why I hate seeing masculinity be handed over from insecure men to other insecure men who reduce it to domination, violence, blood, warfare, and conquest over everything. Their neighbors, their land, their enemies, their women. It's their entire thing. That's not what it is to be a man. And again, unfortunately, this isn't coming out of left field. He's not being biblically inconsistent. He is recognizing and attaching himself to and continuing to promote the toxic biblical masculinity. And that's not the whole Bible, but it's most of it. This religious model of masculinity where domination equals leadership. Aggression is now the same thing as courage. Cruelty instead of conviction. Obedience to violence as faithfulness. It's disgusting. And yes, a lot of it comes from the ancient descriptions of what were going on at these times. But that doesn't beautify it. That doesn't redeem it. It just shows us that we should appreciate the fact that in many countries in the modern age, we've been able to, for the most part, move past some of this to some degree sometimes. I'll take it now from where we were then, but how historically ignorant do you have to be to wish for that or think that that is the ideal? To think that you're missing out on your masculine purpose in modernity now because you don't get to go slice and dice with the boys. I'm a man. I provide. I protect. But more importantly, I love and I serve and I care. And the only reason I bring that up is because Joshua says any real man loves that verse. I'm a real man and I don't love that verse. I'm not turned on by that verse. I'm not excited by that verse. If I were a Christian, that isn't the verse that I want to use to teach my son about masculinity, which would just lead to me having to cherry pick, which is one of the reasons why I got serious about if I could defend this God and this faith before I started raising a young man. That's being a man. Checking yourself, checking your ego, checking what's comfortable for you to protect someone else. I don't want to teach my son that only a real man is strong if he enjoys violence. That only a real man can be faithful if he suppresses moral discomfort. That only a real man is courageous if he stifles empathy. That to be biblical is to accept hierarchy without scrutiny. That a man is real when he mocks anyone who feels disgust at obviously disgusting things. Now, if he wanted to make an argument about if the Bible is literal or should be taken literal in all aspects, or not all evangelicals do this, or evangelicals do this, but that doesn't represent all Christianity, or there's a time and place for these things, and we have to understand the context of warfare and the difference between prescription and description. We could get into all of that and he'd still be on the wrong end, I assure you. But his move here of utterly embracing it, and how much we see that continuing to sweep through, specifically I'm speaking for the United States, is disturbing, concerning, and gross. And that's why we're talking about it, and why I want to continue to talk about subjects that didn't seem connected to me at first to this channel, like helping young men in masculinity or getting more involved politically. So let me just say, for those of you listening, to those of you that are younger or have previously embraced this kind of biblical masculinity, don't take after the insecurities of Joshua here. A secure man does not need to prove his manhood by celebrating violence. A secure man doesn't need to make troubling Bible verses into hype videos. A secure man can look at, even if they're a Christian, ancient texts and say, that's brutal, that's ugly, and it's a reflection of its time, and go no further. And again, we'd still need to deal with some of that if we're just arguing in general against typical Christian apologetics. But for the point I'm making here today, it would be such a step in the right direction. But insecurity can't do any of that. Insecurity has to posture. And I don't typically go this far on the individual that I'm reacting to. But the point is, I want you to see what it looks like. It's ugly. Real women, if we're going to be throwing around these categories, they see through that. If your goal here is to impress women, this isn't it. If your goal here is to impress other men, be careful which kind you want to impress. I have an incredible woman in my life, and I would be embarrassed to get all geeked up about the nastiness of this verse in front of her, or in general. And as a father raising two children, a boy and a girl, I would so clearly be doing them a disservice if I were making videos more like Joshua and less like I am here. And I want to just tie it back again to what I argue with here so often: the harm, the danger of religion, of this religion, Christianity. It's one of the most dangerous things religion can do, is get someone to distrust their moral disgust only when it comes to their particular holy book. That all of a sudden, anything that they would be embarrassed to like or would never promote become not just acceptable or like borderline, but good, actual masculinity when attached to their God. We should be able to say that's grotesque, like we would if we heard about genital mutilation in any other context. But the religious-minded person says, oh, wait a second though, but this one's about David. And David's in the Bible, and David's a good guy in the Bible, therefore this must be good. In fact, it must not just be good, it must be awesome. And how quickly you can change the mind of what would otherwise be a normal individual. That's the power of religion. That's the harm of religion. I want young men to be strong. I want young men to be capable. I want them to be brave and resilient and courageous. I want them to protect people and build things and tell the truth and keep promises and regulate their emotions and take responsibility and stand up under pressure. But none of that requires glorifying ancient brutality to save face with your God. None of that is pretending that every biblical horror is somehow noble and righteous. Masculinity deserves better than men who need mutilated penises to feel strong. That's it for today. I don't know if I covered this the way that I wanted to, but I think it's a good jumping off point. I think it's a good conversation starter. Let me know what you think here. I'll hope to see you Thursday with a new comment deep dive, and until then, keep thinking. Thank you to my top tiers of support, my Iconoclast, Ann, Boris, Chris, Greysteel, Gnarlywill, Grant, GVI, Jimmy, Joe, Kitboga, Matthew, Perry, and Shawn, my Humanist heroes, Chris, Craig, James, Jarrod, Kristi, my Atheist advocates, Aquitar, Caleb, Dakota, Dan, Drew, Jeff, Jeffrey, Jeremy, Jugs, Julie, Malcom, Paul, Rege, Sparky, and Thomas, as well as all of my secular scholar patrons. If you enjoy Mindshift, would you consider joining these fine people? Thanks, and have a great day.